I just found it super compelling that this person could remember that experience over all of the other experiences and how fresh it was many years later. So sometimes we take for granted the little moments that have a chance to make a big impact.
Hello and welcome to the All Onboard podcast, your go-to resource for all things related to employee onboarding. I'm your host, Thomas Kunjappu, founder and CEO of Cleary, and today I'm excited to be joined by Gary Fernandes, the Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer at Sandy Spring Bank. With over 30 years of experience in human resources, Gary has shaped the employee experience across multiple industries, from banking today, but in the past, healthcare. He's been instrumental in making Sandy Spring Bank an employer of choice and has played a key role in integrating employees during mergers and acquisitions. So we have a lot to talk about, Gary. So first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It's a pleasure to join you today.
And same here, we have so much to talk about. You've had a long and distinguished career in HR. You've seen things evolve. Could you tell me a little bit about how your career has influenced your approach to employee engagement and how it's evolved in your view over the years?
Well, folks will tell you that companies will say that people are their most important asset. I think where the rubber meets the road is trying to determine how they act on behalf of their employees. So when you think about the employee life cycle, from the minute a person thinks about coming to your company to the time that they join and how their career goes, there are touch points throughout that are important in the employee experience. I think aligning the employee's expectation with the experience from the organization is critically important to making that work. And I've had the fortune of seeing it work in positive ways. I've seen it work where maybe the alignment wasn't quite there, or maybe there wasn't as much of a commitment to ensuring that you're transparent and letting people know what to expect from their experience with your organization.
Can you tell me about one of those times that sticks in your mind about like when you've tried to create an employee experience that either worked or didn't work as you expected?
Sure. So I think one of the first ways you do that is you listen. You have to listen to people's stories. A couple of years back, I was talking to a senior leader who had also a distinguished career, and they tell me a story about their first day at work. And so this is a person that had been around, had risen through the ranks of an organization, but yet I found it compelling that they could recall their first day. And there was an opportunity where they felt like, hey, I'm joining this new organization. I'm excited to be here. And they were struck by the fact that their manager didn't have that same feeling. And just they thought maybe it would be a nice, courteous thing to maybe take me to lunch and see how my first day is going. And I just found it super compelling that this person could remember that experience over all of the other experiences and how fresh it was many years later. So sometimes we take for granted the little moments that have a chance to make a big impact. And so that's resonated with me. And we do a great deal of listening here at Sandy Spring to hear from our employees so that we can craft that experience, learn from areas where we have opportunities, and leverage the things that we're doing correctly.
Right. The moment in the onboarding, day one, how you're treated by your manager is just something people can remember for a long time. And you're talking about a seasoned executive here.
Right. When you think about the feelings that go through a person, they've made the decision to join your organization. They may have read about your organization. They've bought into what you're selling. Now, the first day they come in and they have an opportunity to see what you've told them at work. And I think that's where, when I talked about misalignment between expectation and experience, it's so important. And so we spend a lot of time talking to managers about their role in that process because someone might take that for granted. New person, they're going to be fine. I've done all the things in the background that need to happen and just expect maybe things to go as they would be expected to go.
This story is really about the manager, right? And there's a lot of variability in the experience in your first day or days, depending on who your manager is, much less, what the company is, right? From your perch in HR, how can you influence that? How can you influence what happens? What's the process that managers go through at the ground level?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, based on feedback that we've heard from our employees, they've told us time and time again how impactful the manager is to their experience. So think about if we look specifically at day one or the onboarding process, we want to make sure that we have a consistent experience. So we need to be partners with our managers to help them understand, one, the importance of onboarding, and two, provide them with tools that will allow for them to be consistent with how they welcome, engage, and ensure that employees that are coming on to the company understand what to expect. And you think about things like having a computer, make sure that computer works, or that the phone, if I need to pick up the phone and call someone, do I know who to call?
Mm.
And so we spend time with our managers. We provide checklists to them. We have an onboarding landing page for them to go in advance. They get prompts to say, okay, before the employee starts, make sure these three things happen. On day one, these additional things should happen. And then we follow up with not only the employee, but the manager to see how that experience is going.
As a manager, this might all feel like tedium, right? There's just, okay, HR is giving me a bunch of stuff to do. I'm not like, I have other things to do as well. And I don't know, I just hired this person. I need them to be productive because it's such an important dynamic, right? Just getting it right with managers where they feel like you're enabling them, right? With all this stuff versus you're giving them stuff to do. So
Right.
how do you
Now,
strike that
again,
balance?
it's a great point. I think the first thing we do is we make sure they understand the value of the resource that they've just been provided, right? So we may talk to them about what was the time that it took to fill the job? What was the pain points before you had that person? I think you're correct. It's natural to say, now I have this new person that's sorted. Let's move on to the next thing. Because as a manager, you're going to have a lot on your plate. But
You
we
might have to
really
hire
talk.
the next person too.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if you don't do it right with this person, you may be hiring that person and the next person, right? So you really want to make sure that they understand it. It's a business case. This is a resource. You want to leverage that resource. You want to get the most out of that resource. And it took effort for you to get that resource. So now how do we get that resource to start to pay dividends and helping them understand? And the point of telling stories and giving examples really helps drive the point home because if you're right, if you just say, hey, here's a checklist, make sure you do that, then it's a task. If we're talking about the emotional connection that an employee feels, and that emotional connection has an impact on their engagement level, their performance, their potential to stay longer in the organization, now you're talking about business level stability. And that kind of stability resonates with a manager. And so that is the point that we try to get to is it's not just about checking that, it's about making sure that people feel welcome. When they feel welcome, they're going to produce for you. And you're not going to have to worry about this issue. You're going to be able to move on to the next thing.
Can you tell us a little bit about practically the different tactics that you worked on that you've seen work consistently and you want every manager or most managers, depending on the department? And what are the kinds of activities or tactical steps that either you're doing directly with your team or you're ensuring that managers are doing so that you have this great lasting impression?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. So we spend time with our HR business partners. We make sure that they're familiar with what is going to be expected of the manager. We understand that some managers may have more hiring needs than others. So they may be
Hmm.
more familiar with the process than someone who maybe does it not as regularly.
Hmm.
And then we standardize it, right? We allow for you to personalize, but at the same time, there are those touch points. A couple days before the person starts, did you reach out? Make sure they understand where to report on the first day, what to expect from their first day. There's someone there to greet them. Again, tell the story about the employee that's walking around the building because they didn't get issued a badge and they can't get in. So now they're stressed because they were supposed to be there at a certain time. So we want to avoid those little things that people wouldn't think would be impactful. But again, it resonates and weighs on an employee if you don't get those things right.
Hmm.
As I mentioned before, we have checklists. We have an onboarding process that is automated that gives reminder emails to the manager, and the business partner will support that person so they know, let's say, for example, 7 days in advance, they need to put in the equipment requests for that
Hmm.
individual. Because one of our stated goals is we want that employee to be able to come in and start work on day one, not wait for a computer, not I have the computer, but my phone doesn't work. Right. Again, as I've said, we've heard from employees throughout to say, what was great about your experience or where were some opportunities in your experience? So this is feedback that we're hearing directly from employees who have lived that. So we're able to say, this is what our employees are telling us, and this is why we think it's important. So we bring those together. We also provide a welcome kit for employees when they come in that could have a signed welcome card from our employee experience manager, a mouse pad with our values. These aren't things that you don't see at other organizations, but it does have, wow, they are appreciative that I'm here. They are welcoming me. We will provide a branded item as well so that they have some pride of ownership in joining our organization. We have a template for the manager to send out an email to welcome the employee, and then we ask them to follow up. I mentioned checklists, but one of those items is make sure to come greet the employee and walk them around, introduce them to other people, right? So that they understand what do they understand where
That'd be
the
nice. Yeah.
break room is, right? If I want to get a drink of water, or if I have to use the restroom. Again, these are things you would think, gosh, those are common sense. And they are, but to your point, managers have a lot on their plate and they may not think of that automatically, but we try to help them understand and we want to make it easier for them. It's not that we're providing work, we're actually making that experience easier for them, which is going to provide a win for them and their new employee.
Hey, it's Thomas here. Hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Are you curious to see how your onboarding program stacks up against the industry's best? Check out Cleary's latest onboarding assessment tool. It offers in-depth analysis and customized recommendations to enhance every aspect of your employee onboarding, from pre-boarding to company culture integration and more. Whether you're just setting up your onboarding program or you're a CHRO at a Fortune 100 company, this assessment can improve your onboarding know-how. Check it out at gocleary.com/onboarding-assessment. Again, that's gocleary.com/onboarding-assessment. You can also find the link in the episode notes. Now back to the show.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost paradoxical that you want to have this servicing mentality, right? You want to really make sure the person feels like they are being completely like welcomed, which in my mind often would go towards certain personality types that will naturally be welcoming to people, right? And that's just like the way people do treat each other like naturally. And that's all there. But if you want to do this at scale in an organization, it comes down to process and rigor, right? And just saying, this is how we do things, and we make sure we do that every single time. It's because it might be natural for people to do this with managers in terms of being like welcoming and all the things, but it's hard to do that consistently over and over again when there's so many other demands on your time.
Completely agree. I think process is critical to scalability. And as you get larger, you don't have the visibility sometimes to ensure that is happening. So we also have some checkpoints. I mentioned we survey our employees after their first 90 days. What went right about your onboarding? Where were some areas of opportunity? We gather those analytics so that if we do have a manager that may not be as comfortable with the process or may not buy in initially, we can go back and we can show how those little things could have an impact for them. And so that is also that feedback loop is critically important, getting employees into orientation as quickly as possible. So we
Mm.
used to have a point where you don't think about orientation, but think about all of the things that go into an orientation and how employees come in and they have lots of questions about your company. If they're coming 30, 60, 90 days after they've started, they may have gotten those answers. They may not be the right answers. They may not have gotten answers to other questions that they had. So we made a committed effort to say, all right, we are going to have a stretch goal of having everyone with no longer than 30 days. And we hear from employees that come in and say, we have an in-person orientation. We bring our executives down to have lunch with them for the first time. And that's where we start to hear, I heard about this organization and the recruiter told me that it was a great place to work. But I'll tell you, I've never had this experience or having this welcome kit and somebody greet me and make me feel welcome was just such a differentiator. And so we use that to help us validate what we're doing. We're always striving to get better. I certainly won't sit here and tell you we have it perfect, but I think having that feedback loop and that willingness to aspire to getting better all the time, I think really matters.
So I'd like to actually dig in, but we'll come back to that. But just the future, and you're talking about continuously getting better on what's on your mind there. But before that, maybe I'd like to just zoom out because you worked in different industries, right? And you've seen the workplace and employee expectations and recruiting cycles shift in over these times, right? So we could look at it chronologically. How have things in terms of expectations shifted, if at all, chronologically? And also, if you're comparing different industries or employee types, are there patterns, things that you feel like you've uncovered, something that might work in healthcare but wouldn't in banking or vice versa? And what are things that I guess HR professionals should be bringing as like universal values versus like things that just break down and you need to be more specific based on company or industry?
I will say this, working in multiple industries, there's more things you find in common than not because you're still dealing with people. So people still have those common tenets that they would expect, feeling welcome, being respected, listened to, those kinds of. At the same time, I think there are you asked about the landscape. The landscape has certainly shifted. 20 years ago or more, you would have said, "Hey, you come to work, I'm gonna tell you what to do. We're gonna expect you to do it, and you're gonna get paid for that, and that is the value proposition."
Mhm.
Today, employees expect a whole lot more. If you're going to just treat me like you would on any other piece of equipment, then I'm not going to be as engaged. I'm not going to be loyal to your brand or to your organization. And so you have to recognize and acknowledge that people come with different needs, they come with different challenges, and you want to be able to try to meet them where they are. Now, that doesn't mean that you can completely personalize every experience, but I think acknowledging the fact that we just talked about all these things that we are doing because feeling welcomed, feeling like you made the right decision is really important. People have more choices. They have the ability to access more information than they ever have via technology, different platforms, the internet, et cetera. And so your experience is going to be amplified. It's not just word of mouth, it's more than that.
Mhm.
And so I think you have to acknowledge that you have an opportunity and that what you do, that message is going to get out through various channels. And so I think it's being cognizant of it. Maybe we weren't as sensitive to that in the past. If you're in a high volume hiring scenario versus fairly regularly or less regularly, then you may have a little bit different approach. But I think we have learned to value what our people bring more and more. And I think the more that we do that, the better we're able to differentiate ourselves from. Because if you think about it, most companies they have benefits and they have pay and they have PTO and they have all these others. So that is
Mhm.
not a differentiator unto itself. It's how you make people feel when they come to that location. Or even if they're remote, are you engaging with them? Are you leveraging the technology to be able to connect? Even if it's just a check-in via a Teams or an email, that still matters. Because if you are remote, and we learned this during the pandemic, if we didn't talk about regular touch point, people felt very isolated pretty quick. Does anybody even know I'm around? Do they know that I exist? And so I think
Mhm.
the industry can change because the demographics will change on that industry. Meaning, if you're a warehouse, you got most of those people in person. If you
Sure.
are working in another environment, in a bank, you may have multiple types of populations, folks that are in the office every day versus some that are fully remote. So you have to think about multiple approaches where maybe in the past the life was a little simpler.
So it only makes it more complicated if you have a mix, right? And how that's shifted over time. Then you said it's mostly the same, but could you dig in a little bit more? I'm curious because you mentioned high volume versus lower volume hiring environments. How would you approach onboarding differently in those worlds?
I would hope that the more experience you have, much like at bats, right? The more opportunities you have to do something, the better at it you're going to be. Maybe the less time you're going to spend talking with managers and showing them how the process works versus looking for ways to tweak the process. A high volume environment just means you're going to have to leverage scale and technology more. You may not have the luxury of that personal touch. But that's where delegation comes in. You might
Mm.
appoint an ambassador or a champion that's in that location that can execute on the items that we're talking about. So that's the other thing we talk to managers about is that there's going to be times where you're not physically able to do it, but that doesn't mean it can't still happen. And maybe that's via technology or maybe that's via delegation, but it's still the same employee. It still has a significant impact in making sure that employee knows, well, I knew they weren't going to be there, but they told me that someone was going to come greet me. And you know what I mean? It shows that planning and
Mhm.
preparation and really feel like that was a meaningful attempt that my manager made to make me feel welcome.
So before this, we were talking about the concept of artifacts and how important you said they were, like having artifacts in any process, but certainly in the onboarding process. If someone is getting into this company, that it is happening successfully because of certain artifacts that are being produced within the organization. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you're thinking about that?
So I think I mentioned that we provide a small gift to an employee. So there's nothing that doesn't say welcome like a gift. So that's number one. But it also provides us an opportunity to provide messaging to the employee. So to reinforce some of the things they heard about our principles and our values. As I
Mm.
mentioned to you, most companies will have it on the wall or in some, but you have to combine what you say with what you do. And so I think we just look to reinforce those things with these artifacts, some type of welcoming that's part of the brand, maybe another piece that talks about the values of our organization, the orientation. We talk a lot about the history of our company.
Mm.
We bring people in to talk about their experience, not just their employment, but also their involvement in the community. Maybe they've grown through the organization. So again, these are opportunities to reinforce what we talk about from a branding perspective. We recently just kicked off an initiative, so we are fortunate where when we do lose someone, we have a fairly good percentage of people that decide to come back. And so we've incorporated a boomerang with our branding on it that says, "Welcome back. We appreciate that you went out there and did your thing, but you found your way back home. And we're glad you're here."
Mm.
And I think little things like that walk by and maybe can start a conversation or get people to engage and talk about those things. Word of mouth and that type of interaction is far more than anything you're going to see on a picture or on the wall.
That's really helpful to go into some of those details. And I would actually extend this concept of artifacts to also include some of those boring things like, look, the chore list that the manager did. Look, we know we welcomed this employee well because not only did we give them the gift, we also welcomed them. We did this lunch, we did all these 10 things. So we know we've done our part as an organization to do our best to get them in and get them trained and feeling welcome. Now, you're talking a little bit about the challenges that have come in with flexible work and how that's evolved. And specifically in banking, obviously, there's a mix of different types of workers depending on whether you're in a branch and corporate and even what function. One of the challenges, I think, every organization where there's like a mixed way of working, different policies, is just to make the whole thing feel fair, including in how you would introduce it, how we work to any new employee. So how do you think about that?
As I mentioned, we have multiple populations. We want to make sure that they are cognizant of one another and understand that even as a remote employee, you have an impact on an employee that's in the office every day. And the opposite is also true.
Mhm,
So things like responsiveness, when you have digital types of meetings, making sure folks are present, cameras are on, that they're presentable in their meetings. The responsiveness part's important because if you are in the office and
mhm,
you can't see the other person, but you've reached out to them through channels and your mind starts to tell you your own story. And in many cases, you're probably responding to a request from a client. So now you have that added pressure. So again, we remind managers, we remind our employees when they come in that we value the fact that we have these various populations, but it has to work. It's an ecosystem, and each person complements the other. And so there is that level of respect that has to flow through. So that means, again, we're going to have to send out reminders, guidelines as to what's appropriate, when it's appropriate. That is also part of our checklist to have managers say, okay, we
mm,
do have Zoom meetings regularly or Teams meetings. These are some things that you can expect. We ask you to respond to communications within X number of time. Use Teams live chat as much as possible for folks to correspond and connect with one another. So I think acknowledging it, Thomas, and making sure that you recognize that everybody's providing value in one way, shape, or form, but they all fit together to deliver for our client. And I think that's what's critical.
so let's look ahead together, and we can do that from a micro view and then kind of zoom out from there as well. You mentioned that you're always looking at feedback to keep improving what you're doing across the company, but certainly in human resources. So, what are you looking ahead to? Like, what's next on the docket? What are major priorities that you're thinking about over the next quarters or years?
So I think the first thing, like any organization, is growth. How do we grow? How do we grow healthily, scalable? How do we make sure that we are attracting the right kind of talent to help us deliver on all
Hmm.
of the things that we want to accomplish? So leveraging technology, certainly, again, not something that you're not going to hear from everyone, but how are we doing that? How do we make the applicant process easier? How do we talk about the applicant experience that leads into the employee experience? So how much further upstream can we get to help people make it easier to come and work with us? And then
Hmm.
once they're here, show them why they made the right decision to come and join our organization. Thinking about it's a very competitive industry, especially in our market where folks have choices. And so we have to continuously talk about the value that we provide, but also understand that this is a resource that also has choices. And so we would need to earn the right to keep those employees every day. So we talk a lot about whether that's benefits offerings that we have. We are always looking for ways to come up with creative new benefits, ask our employees what's most compelling for you. The last time we did that, identity thefts was a big topic. So we went out and we provided a benefit to our employees and their families, free identity theft protection. Little things like that may not be super expensive, but they absolutely have an impact. Talking about where you start is not where you're going to finish. So we've talked a lot today about going forward. How do we do a better job of passing, letting people know how they can grow within our organization?
Hmm.
because I don't expect that the market's going to get less competitive. It may stabilize slightly. It may not be the post-pandemic, right, mass resignation that you saw in the couple of years ago, but there'll still be fighting for that best talent and differentiating yourself from any number of competitors. And it's not just banks that we compete against, technology companies. We compete against, we need finance people and HR people and all of these other groups. So
Mhm.
that's critically important as well.
So then if you look at the HR profession in general, where do you think what's going on there? Because I feel like this is a profession that's being challenged, expanded, remixed, reorganized. What is the pull from the broader leadership teams, from HR teams of the future?
Another great question. The human capital issue will be the same issue. Do you find the right people? How do you find them? How do you leverage that with the types of technology that are coming forward? And what could the potential impact be on people when you think about AI in the next gen? It's here. We are figuring out ways to make it more effective for us, but there's still this fear component. What more and more you're hearing HR leaders really need to lead in terms of what is the company strategy around AI? How is that going to impact our employees? There's a lot of fear and misinformation related to AI. All those things impact someone's ability to successfully do their job. We are going to continue to be looking at ways to deliver for the organization on the human capital side that's efficient, cost effective. We need our HR professionals to do more than just hire and onboard. It's going to be, again, the entire employee life cycle. How are we forecasting beyond, okay, you've hired the person? Because if you hire them and you lose them, you're stuck in a hiring cycle, right? You need to
Mhm.
hire them, you need to grow them, and then you keep them. So, how do we get ahead of the curve a little? It's been a challenging last couple of years, whether, like I said, it was the great resignation. Before that, it was the pandemic. We are constantly reinventing ourselves to help deliver for our businesses. And we're still wrestling with what is the right mix of remote versus hybrid? How does that work? So we are constantly talking about ways that we can be more effective to deliver value to our organizations. And I just don't think that pace of change is going to slow down. I think it's just going to continue to accelerate.
Hey, it's Thomas here. Now, you and I might think it's obvious that people are your biggest resource, and investing in your onboarding program to make it world class is a bet you want to make. But how do you talk about this with your CEO or CFO so that you can get them on board with investing in an updated onboarding program? They're always looking for something that can save money and boost productivity at the same time. Well, I've got something exciting for you. Check out Cleary's Onboarding ROI Calculator. It's easy to use. Just enter some info about your current onboarding process and your company and see how much time and money you could be saving with a modern onboarding solution. Head on over to gocleary.com/onboarding-ROI to give it a try. See what you learn and let us know what you think. Again, that's gocleary.com/onboarding-ROI. You can also find a link in the episode notes. Now, back to the show.
And again, at this very moment, as of this recording, we are again in a point of inflection with in the US, the Fed reducing the federal funds rate by 50 basis points and marking a turn which could mark a turn in some direction for the broader economy and labor market. The shifts keep on coming. With that said, for folks who are looking to get into HR or who are doing onboarding work today or employee experience work, what are the kind of things that are going to be demanded more of folks like that, especially folks who are like relatively junior in their careers and they're looking to keep growing? What thoughts would you have for someone like that?
So I think that you said the key word. You have to keep growing. I think you have to be willing to take on the assignments that maybe at right in front of you may not seem to make sense. You got to learn about your business. You can be a great HR professional, know nothing about the business. You are going to have a hard time selling your skill set to your business partner, who is your number one client. And so I think continually finding a way to grow your business acumen, and at the same time, think about what does the future mean? How do I get myself? Is that becoming more familiar with AI? Is that understanding what the technological trends are that are going to make us more efficient? Because we are a cost function. We are always at the forefront of efficiency. And that means being versatile in terms of my skill set, right? I don't have the luxury to sit and say, I'm going to do this one job and I'm just going to grow straight up. I've got to be willing to cross over and learn other aspects of the business because that utility makes me more valuable as an HR professional. So that's one piece of advice I offer anyone who's interested in the field. But it's a business component. So
Mhm.
understanding the business side, you don't have to be able to, quote chapter and verse of the balance sheet, but you do need to understand what is that line that you're supporting, whether that's a retail line, whether that's a banking job. Understand more about it because you'll be able to speak the language of the client that you are responding to better. Then you have the ability to position yourself to provide value from a human capital perspective. Things like empathy, resilience, openness to change. These are the skill sets that HR people, because we end up leading those very things for the rest of our organization and
Mhm.
helping them understand the crossroad between whatever they're trying to do, deliver a widget, sell a loan, sell a house, any of those things still cross over the employee experience and the ability to engage people and make them feel good about the work that they're doing.
Great advice. Growth in general, and constantly that having that learning mindset. But then you specifically mentioned being close to the business, and I do hear that there's a also from executives and like folks who are like looking for the help or who are the customer, but also the employee base is the customer. So it's another way. It's just like saying get close to your customer, know what they're going through in a deeper way is another way of saying learn the business.
That's right.
That'll help you make more of an impact, even with everything shifting, like all these factors, maybe in an ever more accelerated way. Speaking of acceleration, all right, Gary, I think it's time. Are you ready for our lightning round of questions?
I think I am.
All right. So let's do it. We're going to go into it 30 seconds or less. Okay. We'll start with an easy one. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Okay. Is it 10 times a day or just four?
Yeah, I'd say closer to the unders four.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Any particular job that you joined where you really remember positively, personally, the onboarding experience? Anything you remember from that?
So I think one of the main things was introducing me to some of the people that I was going to be working with. When you walk into an area where you don't know people, that's probably one of the most uncomfortable things any human being can have. And if you're super extroverted, you may run out and go out and do it yourself. But I am not, believe it or not. I'm more introverted. And so I always remembered the person that took me to the side and said, let me go introduce you to so, and here's who what they are, here's what they do. And here they're going to be able to help you here. Those kinds of things. The person that took that extra little time that didn't know me and didn't have to do it, it meant so much.
That's great. If I were to give you a magic wand and you could redesign one aspect of the onboarding process or the day one or month one across the industry, across, for every employee everywhere, what would you do? What would you change?
My magic wand would tap the top of the head of every hiring manager, and it would impart that onboarding is a very positive thing. It's gonna make your life easier because I think you mentioned how most people look at it as a task or, "Oh, I got all these things that HR says I've gotta do." But if we could turn that mindset around where this is gonna help me be the best manager I can be,
Hmm.
that's the one thing I would do.
Tell me about what's the most rewarding part of your job leading HR at Sandy Spring?
So I have the great privilege of working with a tremendous team of individuals, and so I think we have an opportunity to really shape the moments that matter in one of the most important experiences that any person can have, their job. You think about the amount of time, the people that we meet, the things that we do, it's our livelihood. So much goes into work. So if we can have an impact on making that a positive experience, I find that very rewarding. It's also not the same thing every day. So if you're looking for sort of like a routine day that kind of happens the same all the time, this is probably not the place for you. But we have a very great group of like-minded individuals that are passionate about making a difference and seeing their work over time. And because it's the small little things, as I mentioned. So it's not like you're hitting some home run every time. Sometimes it's just
Mm,
showing up and putting the bat in your hand is what matters. And I have a group that gets that. And so it makes my life extremely easy. And they do a wonderful job executing here.
that's wonderful. So then let me ask one more. Any piece of advice that you ever received in your career that's stuck with you that you might be willing to pass along?
Yeah, so I guess from an HR, one of my mentors in HR early on told me that HR was not a participation sport. So, similarly to what we've been talking about, you've got to get out and get involved. Now, whether that's knowing your client, knowing your line of business, the more you're out there, the more people see you, they trust you, they'll come to you. And that is what makes an effective professional in human resources. Our ability, we can sit and talk about all the technical knowledge and the state laws and all the different things that go into that. That's not what's going to resonate with people knowing that you're there, that they see you, that you're part of what they're doing and you're there to support them. So that's what I would tell any young person considering the role. It's a very rewarding, it can be challenging at times when you think about all of the different things that we do, but it's also very rewarding because there will be times where someone will come out of the blue and talk about something that you didn't even think about that had an impact on them. And maybe it was a small benefits change that had a significant impact on their life and family. Or maybe it was the opportunity that you encouraged them to go apply for that had now blossomed into a career change. You just never know the kind of impact you can have. So getting out there and being a participant is the best way to go.
That's a good place as any, I think, to wrap up this conversation. So big thank you, Gary, for this conversation, for joining us and sharing your story and some of these really useful tactical insights. And with that said, I'll say that's a wrap for today's episode of All On Board. And for everyone out there, keep rolling out those red carpets and make sure that every employee has a great onboarding experience. Thanks again, Gary.